You have to be careful. You have to be careful and tread lightly when folk go to have the meetings on. You do know that folk will have meetings on. Yeah. When you don't know nothing about it, they get on the phone and call and say, meet me at such and such a place. And over lunch, they'll have a meeting. Eating tea and crumpets, they'll have a meeting. Well, this morning they said, since we can't influence his preaching, and since we can't control his preaching, and we can't redirect his preaching, we're going to have to take this joker out. We're going to have to get rid of him. We're going to have to do it because he's messing things up. He's changing the status quo, turning things around. I'm amazed. I don't know about you, but I'm amazed when I read the Bible at how it is that people who say they love God and the church hate preaching. No. And I'm convinced as I study the word that every one of God's preachers preach because they had a bad case of the can't get it. Well. In good times they preach because they couldn't get it. Bad times they preach because they couldn't get it. When folk liked them and didn't like them, they still preach because they couldn't get it. In sickness and in health, those preachers of old preached because they couldn't have it. Just look at it. Just look at it. You see what I'm talking about. Nehemiah preached on a wall. Ezekiel preached in a valley. Daniel preached in a lion's den. Obadiah preached in the face of smug and proud attitudes. Michael preached in the face of social injustice. Jonah even preached to the people that he didn't like. And all of them did it because they had a bad case of the can't. Not only does the devil hate preaching, but because they have this can't help it thing, he also hates preachers. And Satan has a team of hired assassins, poised and trained, ready to take the preacher out. Yeah, that's right. Sometimes it's the hitman of pride. Yeah. Preachers have to be careful about that pride. Pride will take them out. Sometimes it's the hitman of greed. Watch fooling with folks' money. It'll take you out. Sometimes it's the hitman of lust. You know her. Miss 36, 24, 36. Better be careful. She'll take you out. And every time a preacher preaches, the gates of hell fly open and Satan unleashes doom, devastation, and disaster because he hates preaching and he hates preachers. Y'all looking at me funny, y'all ain't saying too much. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Peter couldn't help it, and for his preaching, they crucified him upside down. John the Baptist couldn't help it, and for his preaching, they cut his head off. Stephen couldn't help it, and for his preaching, they stoned him to death. Paul couldn't help it, and they put chains on his hands and shackles on his feet and locked him in a dungeon with no blanket to keep him warm and nowhere to use the bathroom except a hole in the floor. And without an organ or drum or choir or a tambourine, Paul took pen and paper and preached anyway because he couldn't help it. And in our text, the Pharisees are trying to stop Jesus from preaching. He has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was prophet, priest, and king. And because of that, they came together to take him out. Look at it now. Look at it. Chapter 11. Mary and Martha sent for Jesus because their brother Lazarus was sick. It's in the book. But Jesus did immediately come. And his disciples, if you read the story well, got a little upset with Jesus because Lazarus and Mary and Martha were friends of theirs and friends of his. But Jesus, out of his prophecy, said, he looked at them and he said, this sickness is not unto death. There's no reason for us to get in a hurry. There's no reason for us to get in a hurry. Well, then when he finally arrives in Judah, Lazarus is dead. And they start looking at him funny. And the Bible says that Jesus wept. He didn't weep because Lazarus was dead, because he was a prophet, and he knew that that was going to be taken care of. He wept because he was a priest, and he felt the hurt that was inside of the heart of Mary and Martha. He knew what they were feeling. Yes. Then he stood outside the grave of Lazarus, a dead man, and proved to the whole world that he was also the king. Yes. You do know that the king has both power and authority. Yes. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Yes. The king has the authority to command something to be done. But once he gives the command, he has the power to carry out what he commanded to be done. And Jesus showed himself king by exemplifying to all and for everybody to see that he had power and authority over death, hell, and the grave. And he raised Lazarus from the dead. And that was the last straw as far as the Pharisees were concerned. And they called the meeting on Jesus. They called a meeting because they had to stop this man with all of this authority and all of this power from doing what it is that he does so well, preaching. You do know that Jesus preached a sermon outside of Lazarus' tomb, don't you? Oh, yes, he did. He stood flat-footed outside the tomb of Lazarus with all power and authority and preached a 3-word sermon. He said, Lazarus, come forth. And he came out so fast that he still had his grave clothes on. And Jesus told those who were standing around, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And they loosed Lazarus and let him go. And the Pharisees got mad. Y'all ain't helping me preach up here. You see, it would have been all right if Lazarus had gotten up and stayed with his grave clothes on, because then they could have reckoned him to be dead. They could have said he still looks dead, and he still smells dead, and he still acts dead, and he acts around like he's dead, so we're going to reckon him to be dead, because for all practice and purposes, with those grave clothes on, he's still wrapped up in dead stuff. I feel something good. What y'all help me out? Can I go on and preach a little bit more? I said, can I preach this thing the way I feel it down in my soul? Somebody say, preach, preacher. What you have to understand is when someone died during the biblical times, they would take about 75 pounds of myrrh and aloe and anoint the body to preserve it, because they wanted to keep the person the same way they were the last time they saw them. Then they would take strips of linen and completely wrap them from head to toe, and then put a shroud over them. Then they would place the body in a tomb that had been hewed out of the side of a rock and roll a stone in front of the entrance. All of this was done to keep any air and any other contaminants from getting inside and changing the state of the body, because they wanted to preserve the person just like they were the last time they saw them. You see, church, when you are wrapped up in grave clothes, you're pickled and preserved in your present state. When you still have your grave clothes on, for all practical purposes, you are dead. Your arms won't move and your legs don't function correctly, and you can't see or speak because you're all wrapped up in this 75 pounds worth of stuff. So even though you're out of the grave, you still got that stuff that you carry around with you that makes you look dead, smell dead, and act dead. And that's what the devil wants. And that's what all of his emissaries want. He wants you fooling around with dead things and hang out there in dead places so God can't put you on display. You see, Satan is a tricky joker, and he doesn't want you, he doesn't care if you come out of the grave, as long as when you get out of the grave, you're still tied to the dead stuff that you had on while you were in the grave.